Welcome back. You're listening to the panel discussion at Roadmap for Enabling IT Modernization, sponsored by CenturyLink on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today, Dr. Carl Mathias, the Chief Information Officer for the Justice Department's U.S. Marshal Service, John Moses, the Director of the Governance and Enterprise Management Services Division at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Mitchell Thornbrew, the Acting Chief Information Officer at the Indian Health Service in the Department of Health and Human Services, and David Young, the Senior Vice President for Strategic Government for CenturyLink. I want to go back to something that I thoroughly enjoyed that David said about the lifestyle has changed about IT modernization. And John, you wanted to pick up on that a little bit because really what he's talking about is something that I think you just in a small way. The fact is you have so many projects going on at once and delivering those capabilities. So maybe John, talk a little bit about how this agile DevOps fits into your IT modernization.
Sure. So our IT modernization focuses and rests on three principal kind of elements for that stool. First off, we talked about kind of IT modernization. The second is transforming service delivery, and the third is leveraging technology to improve business processes. So I'll talk a little bit more about how we're transforming service delivery. First off, organizationally at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, our CIO and Deputy CIO restructured the office along service delivery lines. So we consolidated 5 divisions into 2 large divisions to focus on those components. In addition, and probably equally substantive, is that we shifted from our prior acquisition strategy, which was a single vendor, single award model for several years, in which most, if not all of the assets, the hardware and the software, were owned by the vendor and leased back to the agency for a fee in the service. We're shifting that to a multi-vendor, multi-award series of services: mobility, security, security operations, end-user computing, and servers, networks, collaborative computing. That's basically data centers and networks. So those 4 big components, and then there's another one for service integration. So those are the 5 pieces we've shifted to. There are different vendors. They all can compete for all those different components, but that doesn't mean they all may win it. And also, so it gives us a much greater flexibility on the point David was talking about, is the rapid evolution of technology. So if we have vendor A providing a service under mobility, we can also recompete that, particularly if there's a new technology that emerges, and then all the vendors can recompete for that, and it might still be vendor A or it might be vendor D to switch it out. So that's providing us a much greater degree of flexibility. It's also reducing our costs, and we're looking at a cost reduction approaching 5 to 10% just on increasing competition across that aspect of acquisitions. Then the other piece that I haven't talked about is leveraging technology for business process and kind of the mission side that Dr. Mathias was talking about. So on the one hand, we're transforming paper-based processes to automated processes through a variety of different efforts. We have a couple pilots underway. And we're also restructuring and rationalizing the multiple mission service applications and systems that we have. So some of the examples for transitioning from paper, we've piloted some technologies for digitization. Now, as we all know, digitization's been out there for decades. However, some of the tools we've piloted and we're looking to further are using artificial intelligence and computer visioning to accelerate and improve the quality of that. So we're looking at pretty dramatic increases in delivery time and lowering costs. In terms of restructuring our systems, one of those, we have the benefit of when we moved to Office 365, we're a pretty big SharePoint user. We have a lot of different applications that follow the Microsoft models. However, that's on-premise. On-premise is a lot different than in the cloud, so we will be going through a rationalization to look at which of those SharePoint applications can be and should be migrated up to 365.
John, one thing you said surprised me is getting kind of away from that managed service approach with the one vendor, at least. Is that because of the cost factor? I mean, can you give me a sense of I hear so much, and maybe I should bring David into this instead, because so many agencies want to move to a managed service. And so I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm just saying that it's an interesting change.
So I think it depends on the business. So for instance, our unified communications, that is moving towards a managed service. So that's somewhat of a different model. Before it was literally every different service. When we went out to mobility, we kind of piloted that a few years ago when we shifted off one technology platform to another and one software platform to another. We actually shifted out and we saw pretty dramatic cost savings and improved service delivery. And we saw the users respond by nearly doubling the number of users for BYOD.
Interesting. Carl, jump in a little bit, the managed service piece, or just from your perspective, this new style of agile DevOps. You said you're knee deep in it.
Yes, so managed service-wise, we're actually pushing more toward that. We had, a big success story was to team up with ATF to go to a managed service approach to our service desk. Because previously I actually had government folks in there helping to run this thing. When we went to the managed service approach and had the vendor run it, our first call resolution times went up, our call abandonment rates dropped by 50%, our average wait times dropped by 70%. I mean, it's dramatic. It's to the point, actually, that we have a way you can do an automated password reset, and people would rather call the service desk because it's faster than them doing it themselves. So you can get a lot of success through pushing. You let the vendors do what they do best versus treat it as if it were inherently governmental work. So that's what I would say about managed services. But what we've found in terms of progressing toward modernization is you have to look. I'm currently looking at two sides, and this is going to integrate together, but I have my operations side, which is keeping the lights on, keeping things running, and then I have the development side, which is building the new capabilities or enhancing what we have. We are eventually going to progress toward a DevOps model that brings those closer together. But we've really worked toward Agile, and part of the first thing you have to do with Agile is there's some upfront work that we've discovered. And so what we did for the major modernization effort and our significant modernization efforts afterward for other systems is we do a business process analysis up front to give us the roadmap for what we're going to do for the epics, the user stories within the development. And the reason for that's really simple. It's not my saying, but it's an old one that says, if you automate a bad process, you simply deliver a bad product faster, right? So what we've done is to make sure go through and look at those processes, and we found lots of duplication. We eliminate the business issue up front, and then now all of our development projects, with the exception of a couple legacy systems that are going to stay in a legacy mode, now go through Agile, where we have a backlog. We work off that backlog. If new things are brought in by the customers along the way in the development, that's added and prioritized within the backlog and brought out. So we do that for all of our development projects, and now we're starting to move that into our engineering projects. I think the thing I would say in terms of reshaping the culture is that our users were not used to this. They were used to the old waterfall method of we're going to get all the requirements up front, we'll see you in 3 years, and we'll deliver something that's not relevant anymore. We got out of that business, okay? And so bringing the customer in, we had to train them. We learned this the hard way, to be honest, that you need to train them on the process also. They have to understand what their role is as product owner, and they have to understand there's a significant commitment of time on their part. But what we found is they appreciate it because they get what they want after, and they get it faster, and they are able to add as we go along. And when I could pick an example, the Shield product, which is this handheld capability to do work, started with just wanting to pull criminal histories on the spot, and then they saw how fast that could be brought out. Then it was, can you read a driver's license? Then it was, can you read a license plate? And then can you get fingerprints? And so those all became increments in the Agile process, and it's worked magnificently in that respect.
David, let me turn to you, because one of the things that both what John and Carl kind of described really depended on that network piece, so the modernization of the network, and whether we're talking software defined or network virtualization, or even just a better network has better storage, has better speed. Maybe talk a little bit about why that piece of the network really underpins what they're talking about with agile DevOps and managed services.
Sure. When we jump into networking today, I think the best term to use is hybrid networking. Because it's not going to be an ATM network, it's not going to be a frame network. What we're going to do in hybrid networking is use SDN. It's going to use public IP. It's going to use a variety of technologies just put together, Legoed together, let's say, differently than what we would have experienced in the past, where we were building a 3-year program to build a brand new VPN network. Well, in today's world, we're going to be able to compartmentalize the types of services that a facility might need. And so at the core, your data centers, you probably have some optical type connection. To your regional centers, sure, there could be a VPN, MPLS type based service. Maybe way out at the edge, we're using public IP with the right type of security on it. But what we've done is we've created a single network, a hybrid network, that begins to layer all of those different technologies together as it best needs to what the agency is trying to solve for. So I think it's very unique of what we're going to experience going forward. And again, very unique to each agency and how the agency, we were talking at break about the rural requirements, and it's going to be hard to take an optical solution out to a rural requirement. So what technologies exist and then how do we protect it become really important in how we're designing the foundation that enables all of the discussion that we've been having.
Carl, jump in.
So, Jason, it's coming back to David's point on that. The rural issue for the marshals is a real problem. We're going to have folks who are, have 475 offices, and many of those have T1 lines, and we're upgrading those. But a lot of those deputies are not in those offices. In fact, it's considered a bad thing to be in your office. You want to be out there. So if you're in the middle of Alaska, you have no infrastructure if you're out in a small village. And so we have to be able to integrate. I have to have tools that work whether you're on a mountaintop in Alaska or you're sitting in the middle of Washington, D.C. They have to work at all points in between, which means, back to your point, David, I've got to have this layer above. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking at him, for those of you on the radio, saying, deliver this, please. The ability to look at that as a single network. So whether I'm on LTE, whether I'm on a sat phone, whether I'm tied right in to local circuit, I need it all to work without me having to worry about how do I integrate all this together.
And Carl, I think great applications, right? And the United States federal government is the first to come up with these requirements. I like to say the government is Fortune 101A because it uses and consumes all of the technologies that we see being deployed by Fortune 500 companies. And so if we begin to look across those boundaries and what the Fortune 500s have done to solve similar problems, oil industry would be a great parallel to talk about. How do we build those solutions for the enterprise? We can, with the right security, begin to take those same technologies that we're solving as a corporation for our commercial customers, begin to bring them to bear in our federal marketplace. And I think the EIS contract is like a grocery store because it has all of the things that we've been talking about that the enterprise has been buying, that now the federal government has their wherewithal, has their ability to get at and begin to deploy those technologies for themselves.
Mitch, let me turn to you because I think when Carl was talking about the challenges of having, being in Alaska or being in Washington, D.C., you have very similar challenges. And as you guys are re-looking at your IT modernization and okay, how do we improve our network? What are some of the things that either A, you're going to maybe steal from these guys, yes, or what's coming to mind as you guys kind of start to reimagine that piece?
So, ultimately we're worried about that last mile on broadband, but, and the costs associated with running fiber to some remote areas. One of our examples to get rid of a T1, was almost a $2 million project and took 18 months to deliver the results, to put that last mile of infrastructure in about a 20-mile stretch. But But beyond that, looking at how these converged network management tools are coming to bear for us as we add all these endpoints to our network, we're really focused on the security of that network. And so having that centrally managed infrastructure, really allows us to leverage that transition to EIS to create, continuous diagnostic and mitigation programs on the endpoints of those networks, and focus less on being reactive to things inside of our network, but really protect those edges as well.
So you went down the path of security. That was the next segment, but that's fine because I think there's a ton to talk about there. So let me turn to David a little bit, and when we talk security and we talk about network security, one of the big benefits of SDN, network virtualization, is that pushing of changing the software quickly. It's not like, okay, I got to bring another server and I got to put that new tool in the server and hopefully it works with everything else. Maybe talk about those benefits of SDN as it relates not just security, but the flexibility that they're also looking for.
Yeah, I think as we look at what's happening with technology, and it's about applications now, and we're seeing applications deployed on white boxes, right? And so that's occurring up and down the stack. It's somewhat new to the telecom side of things, but it's fast approaching where we're going to be able to stick a white box. There's a lot of.
I'm going to interrupt.
Yep.
Define white box, because I think, at least for me, I'm not familiar with that term. It's a what?
It would be a white label box is just a standard deployed, say, server that you can put any application on.
Okay.
And so if you deploy all of those boxes out to your edges, now you're not in a proprietary mode of equipment manufacturer. Now you've got a white labeled box that can handle multiple service provider deployments of software. So maybe we put out a profile for a hybrid network that's X, Y, and Z out on the white label. We want to make a broad change to the network. Now all we have to do is send that batch out overnight. In a proprietary world, you've got to understand what you've got deployed where, what proprietary language and tools that you're using. So efficiency increases quite a bit, and you've been able to secure it in a uniform manner versus this proprietary system, that proprietary system. So it's a much different environment to deploy.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to jump into that security conversation a little more deeply. You are listening to the panel discussion, A Roadmap for Enabling IT Modernization, sponsored by CenturyLink on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.